Hello, everyone, and welcome to my final presentation for Business Analytics. My name is Joseph Pappaceno. Today's presentation will analyze the Chelsea Winery case study. So let's jump right into it. I have included a table of contents here right up front, which lists the topics of discussion for today's presentation. And Scott, for your convenience, I've included a hyperlink under each section heading within the table of contents. So after this presentation concludes and I turn this PowerPoint over to you, and if you need to jump to a certain section very quickly, you can simply hover over the section heading in the table of contents, click, and you will be directed straight to that section. Let's start off with the business understanding. Chelsea Winery is located in Washington State. It is important to understand that the geographic location strongly determines which wine grapes can be grown by your winery. For example, the climate in Southern California is different from Washington, and the climate in France is different from Washington. So it's really not practical to compare your business to businesses, wineries across the world. So we want to keep our competitors close to your region. Produce 2,000 cases of Chardonnay annually. That's 12 bottles a case for a total of 24,000 bottles per year. And you sell direct to consumers via your on-site store or online. And sales have been declining by 2 to 5% annually since 2015. The business objective for this analysis project is to use the data provided to support or refute Scott's decision to improve sales via public relations or improve revenue via product line extension. The research will be successful when a conclusion is drawn regarding the effect of improved public relations and/or product line extension on revenue. We're working with a couple constraints during this data analysis project. First, we have time. The research must be conducted before the next review period by Wine Enthusiast magazine. Scott, we want to get your wine reviewed as soon as possible this year, not next year, not the year after that. And the year-over-year loss in sales means the issue is time sensitive. We really want to get you that publicity, get you published in Wine Enthusiast magazine so you can attract more consumers to your winery. The data provided for the research only included wines that were produced in the US, reviewed by Wine Enthusiast magazine, and which scored over 80 points. It is important to note that any conclusions drawn from testing the data can only be rationally applied to wines which meet the criteria for publication in Wine Enthusiast magazine. For example, the wines published in Wine Enthusiast magazine scored only between 80 and 100 points. There's a vast array of wines out there that score between 0 and 79 points, which this data cannot provide expectations for those wines. Let's understand the data a little bit better. There were 8,646 total records. I personally checked for blanks and data entry errors within the data set. I found 56 blanks in the price column, and these records were excluded from price analyses only. Furthermore, there were numerous data entry errors that I corrected. For example, in the points column, 96,000 was converted to 96. And this was not the only data entry error. There were other ones like 88,000 or 870, mostly just taking off zeros from those entry errors. And I didn't include this, but there are also some misspellings in the wine category column. For example, red was spelled sometimes with 2 D's or 2 E's. So I just went through and corrected those spelling mistakes. I checked the data for plausibility. Some of the prices piqued my interest since they were so high, but after a quick internet investigation, I confirmed these prices on the winery's website. Research question number 1. Which category of wine has the highest average points? Here is a simple bar chart which shows the average points per wine category. You can see that red blend blew the competition away. They got an average of 90 points, followed by red wine, which averaged over 89 points. White in third place, white blend in fourth, And lastly, rosé scored significantly lower than the other wine categories. In the top left of this slide, I have included a descriptive statistics chart. As you can see, the top three arrows pointing toward mean, median, and mode. If you notice, these values are all within 1 point of each other. Thus, the mean, median, and mode were all reasonable measures of center for this data set. Red blend claimed the highest average score, as we saw on the bar chart in the previous slide. Rosé had the lowest average rating, also on the bar chart, and the lowest range of scores. I have included the range of scores per wine category in the lower left corner of this slide, and you can see, for example, red wine had the full range of points possible for publication in Wine Enthusiast magazine. Rosé had not only the lowest minimum of points, but also the lowest maximum points. Research question number 2. Which category of wine had the highest average price? What impact did outliers have on average price? On the left side of this slide, I've included a box and whisker plot. So let me describe this graph a little bit more in depth. The blue rectangle that you see on this graph is the middle 50% of the data. So the middle 50% of wine prices for all data entries. The lines above and below the blue rectangle represent the minimum and maximum price in the data set. And all of the dots you see above the maximum price are considered outliers. Now, there is a specific formula we use to identify outliers. The blue rectangle is known as the interquartile range. So the 75th percentile and the 25th percentile, giving you the middle 50%. We find the difference between the upper quartile and the lower quartile. In this case, it was 20. We multiply that value by 1.5 and add it to the 75th percentile. So 20 multiplied by 1.5 is 30. Add that to 40, which was the third quartile, and we get 70. Therefore, any values above $70 per bottle are considered outliers. I've included another descriptive statistics chart in the upper right-hand corner of this slide, as well as the min and max price per wine category in the lower right. As you can see, every wine category except for rosé had an outlier. The effect of outliers. The bar chart on the left is outliers included, meaning I used all of the data entry points in the data set to formulate this bar chart. No data entry was left out. You can see red blend had the highest average price, followed by red. Rosé had the lowest. And then if we move to the right side of the slide, I included the same bar chart, but this time I excluded outliers. So I pretty much filtered them out before formulating this bar chart, and you can see that the average price per wine category dropped for all the categories except rosé, which stayed the same. Red blend dropped by about $3.50, red dropped by $3, but still this drop was not enough to knock them off of first and second place. Wines in the red blend category had the highest average price per bottle. The second highest category was red. And talking about outliers, as I said earlier, any price higher than $70 per bottle was considered an outlier. There were outliers for every category of wine except for rosé. Accordingly, the average price per wine category decreased after outliers were removed. Research question number 3. Do wines with notes of fruit rate higher in average points and in average price compared to wines without notes of fruit? In order to solve this question, we conducted an A/B test. The first step in this process was identifying fruity wines versus non-fruity wines. So records which contained fruit words in the description of the wine were recoded to 1. Any wines without a fruit word in their description were recoded to 0, and this is how we identified each category. Then we conducted hypothesis testing. So I want you to define hypothesis testing for you. We have 2 hypotheses. The first one is known as the null hypothesis and is denoted HO. This is our expectation or the norm, And the other hypothesis is known as the alternative hypothesis, which is an alternative to our expectation. It challenges the norm. So for points, the null hypothesis is the mean score for wines with fruity notes minus the mean score for wines without fruity notes is greater than or equal to 0. This summarizes your expectation, Scott, which was wines with fruity notes achieve a higher average score than wines without fruity notes. The alternative challenges your expectation. This is the mean score for wines with fruity notes minus the mean score for wines without fruity notes was less than 0, which means that fruity wines do not score above non-fruity wines. The hypotheses for price were the same, except we substituted score for price. Here is the output of my Excel calculations for confidence intervals. I want to explain a confidence interval. Since we only have a subset of the population, known as a sample, we can't make definitive claims about the population. So we conduct a confidence interval based on the limited amount of data we have. The confidence interval essentially means it is a range of values that we expect the true population mean to fall between. So for price, I conducted a test for fruity and non-fruity wines. N refers to the number of records per category, so significantly more fruity wines than non-fruity. We calculated a sample mean and standard deviation for each. Next, we constructed the confidence interval. We calculated an error, which was subtracted to or added to the sample mean to identify the lower and upper bounds of our confidence interval. And how we interpret this is we are 95% confident that the true population mean price for fruity wine is between $31.69 and $32.50. We would also say for non-fruity wine that we are 95% confident the true population mean price for non-fruity wine is between $34.83 and $37.98. I want you to pay very close attention, Scott, to these confidence intervals. Notice that they don't overlap. That's very important, and I'll discuss why on the next slide. And it's for both points and price. As you can see, confidence interval does not overlap. How we interpret this test. The p-value obtained for both A/B tests was less than 0.01%. Therefore, we can conclude that wines with notes of fruit do not have higher average scores or price. The p-value simply refers to the chances of obtaining a test which supports the null hypothesis. In this case, the null hypothesis was that wines with fruity notes scored higher in average price and average points than non-fruity wines. Thus, the p-value demonstrates that the chances of conducting a test based on the sample data which would support the null hypothesis was less than 0.01%. This conclusion is supported by the 95% confident interval constructed for either fruity or non-fruity wines in each test. As I mentioned before, none of the intervals overlap. This means the fruity and non-fruity wines have no estimated points or price in common. Recommendation for product line extension. Scott, the next wine in your product line must be a red blend. Red blend not only scored the highest on average, and it was also the second most rated wine category by wine enthusiasts. This means you have a very high chance of having a red blend wine tasted by wine enthusiast tasters. And not only that, your chances of getting a higher score is elevated. Wines in the red blend category had the highest average price by far. Revenue from newly branded red blend wine could reverse your decline in sales. And I cannot stress this enough, avoid producing rosé as a second wine. Rosé not only recorded the lowest average price, but also the lowest average ratings. And it could be a recipe for disaster if you choose to produce rosé. Rosé is not the way, Scott. Recommendation for producing wine without notes of fruit. You should consider producing a second wine without hints of fruit. Fruity wines receive lower average ratings and price. A non-fruity wine has potential to outscore fruity wine according to the historical wine enthusiast reviews, and not only that, you can fetch a higher market price for non-fruity wines. This next recommendation is a little out of place, but you definitely need to hear it, Scott. Submit Chardonnay to wine enthusiasts for a review immediately. White wines receive the second most total reviews by wine enthusiasts. This means there is a good chance your wine will be selected for tasting. And to put your mind at ease a little bit more, wines in the white category receive the third highest average score. This could be exactly the publicity you needed to boost your sales and attract new customers. My recommendations for advanced research: I suggest that you investigate the cost-benefit analysis of producing a red blend wine. Benefits of red blend wine are clearly outlined in this presentation. However, only you can determine the cost of producing a second wine. I urge you to weigh the benefits and costs of adding red blend wine to your product line. And lastly, you should survey clients who bought your wine in the past. Ask your customers what they liked or did not like about Chardonnay. This can help you pinpoint the reason sales have declined over the past 5 years. And that concludes my presentation. Scott, I hope the information I outlined helps make your business decision easier to make. Thank you.